Welcome to a new episode of Coptic Civilization. I'm Michael Saad. Our topic today is on the study of Egyptian and Nubian Christianity in American academia, in American universities. And our guest today is Dr. Salim Faraji, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at California State University, Dominguez Hills in California, and also a minister at the Methodist Episcopal Church, AME, which is the oldest African American denomination in the Western Hemisphere. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. It's good to be here and share this time with you and talk about the importance of studying the Coptic Church and Nubia in American academia.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. And you are an authority in the field we are talking about, both as a minister in your church, which is a Methodist church, and also because you are the author of this fabulous book.
Yes.
It's really outstanding book. Which is entitled The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, The Triumph of the Last Pharaoh. What a great volume that covers both Nubian Christianity and the interaction and the integral relationship between the Coptic Church and Nubian Church. Thank you again for accepting our invitation. You were born in America on the East Coast and grew up in America. Mm-hmm. When were you first exposed to the study of ancient Africa in general and specifically Coptic and Nubian Christianity?
I was actually an undergraduate at Penn State University, which is in Pennsylvania, in the eastern part of the United States. And I was taking an Introduction to Religion course, and I wanted to focus on a Christian tradition that met two criteria. Number one, it was not a Protestant tradition, and number two, it wasn't rooted in the Western Christian tradition. So my professor at the time suggested that I focus on the Coptic Orthodox Church. So I actually wrote a term paper as a junior in college, a junior at Penn State University, on the Coptic Orthodox Church. And as I was reflecting on that through the course of my studies when I would later go into graduate school, it felt like I had been summoned, if you will, to focus on this area of study, both the Coptic Church and Nubian studies, because I also wrote a term paper on the Sudan and ancient Nubia as an undergraduate as well. And at that time, I had no idea that I would go on to be a specialist in both Coptic and Nubian history.
So actually, the fact that you wrote a term paper on something Coptic topic, was your first step toward being an expert on the subject and career scholar in African Christianity.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting because I know of students who would write a term paper, say, on Coptic art while they are taking a broader course on art history, and so on. So yes, that's very interesting. You later spent time at the Howard University Divinity School in the Washington, D.C. area, and then transferred to Claremont School of Theology in Claremont, California. And how did these experiences lead you to pursue Coptic and Nubian studies?
Well, I spent some time at Howard University School of Divinity in Washington, D.C. I was there from 94 to 95, I believe. And I took a very interesting course that was actually taught by a scholar who was a priest in the Eastern Orthodox Church. I took a course entitled Early African Christianity. And in this course, we, of course, focused on the four major early African Christian traditions, the North African Church, of which Augustine and Tertullian and Cyprian Arnobius are from that tradition. Of course, the Coptic Orthodox Church, with theologians such as Origen and Athanasius, and even the monastic leaders such as Antony and Basa and Shenouda. And then, of course, the Nubian Church, and then the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. At this time, the instructor in the class, said to me, he said, you should focus on Coptic and Nubian studies for further graduate work, maybe even doctoral work. And I even mentioned in my book how his statements at that time were prophetic, if you will, because I would exactly go and do just that. And it was something that was in the air, so to speak, because many Africans, indigenous here to the United States, or African Americans or Black Americans, however you refer to us, oftentimes we wanted to know more than just the European Protestant Christian heritage of which we were brought into through our enslavement. We wanted to understand the Christian heritage pre-enslavement and pre-European contact. So that led many of us to inquire about the Coptic Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and so forth. So during that time, it was in the air, a certain fervor of people wanting to make this connection to this ancient African Christianity. So that's one of the reasons why I took that course, and that course paved the way for me, because once I transferred to Claremont, and Claremont has a reputation for being a center for Coptic studies and a center for Egyptian Christianity. In fact, while I was at Howard, I was actually reading books that were produced at Claremont, such as Berger Pearson's The Roots of Egyptian Christianity, another book called Coptic Magical Texts, put out by Marvin Meyer and Richard Smith. I was actually reading these texts before I even transferred to Claremont. In fact, these texts were the reason why I wanted to come to Claremont. I said, wow, I need to go to Claremont because Claremont has a concentration on Coptic Church, Coptic studies, and Egyptian Christianity. So I made that decision. I left Howard, moved from Washington, D.C. to California, and began to pursue my studies. I even took the Coptic language for a year. I studied Coptic language, studied Coptic texts and so forth. And in fact, I remember when I traveled to Egypt many, many years ago, this had to be 98, 99, I traveled to Egypt. And I actually, in fact, I was in Egypt New Year's Eve, 99, and I went to a Coptic Orthodox church in Luxor in my time in Egypt. And I remember the Coptic merchants being surprised when I told them that I had studied Coptic, and I even said a few words in Coptic. And to their amazement, I guess they were wondering this American had actually studied Coptic in the United States and was excited about it. So, all of this I gained from Claremont. Also, when I was in Egypt, I visited the Coptic Museum in Cairo. And because I was a student at Claremont and had made connections with James Robinson, who's known for his Nag Hammadi studies, which is ancient Egyptian texts, Gnostic texts that were discovered. So at the time, I met Gaudat Gabra.
In Cairo?
Yeah, in Cairo.
Right.
And
he was the director of the Coptic Museum. He was the director. Is that where you visited with him?
Yes, that's where I visited with him.
And now he's in Claremont.
And now he's in Claremont, and
So
I did not know that at the time.
Yeah.
That we would cross paths several years later.
Right.
I was just a PhD student, excited to be in Egypt, excited to visit the Coptic Museum in Cairo. I also visited the, I believe it was this Saint Simeon Monastery in the Aswan area,
Yes.
and so forth.
Yes.
And again, all of this was because of being introduced to Coptic and Nubian studies at Penn State, at Howard, and then, of course, at Claremont. So it's a field that I'm passionate about.
Yes.
I take pride in the fact that, and maybe I shouldn't, but I take pride in the fact that it's somewhat of a specialized, exclusive area,
Right.
and at least in American academia. You know, there's a significant number, but there's not a lot of people who focus on Coptic history. And as an African Methodist minister, I think it's a history that we should focus on, because it's the foundation of Christian history. So.
I had the honor and pleasure of meeting you about 10 years ago in Claremont, while you were preparing your PhD dissertation.
Yes.
And we were also celebrating the career of Dr. Ernie Tune.
Yes.
God bless his soul. Was he instrumental in your providing resources and discussions and so on? Tell us more about him, please.
Well, Dr. Ernest Tune was an intellectual treasure trove at Claremont, and he was very, very instrumental.
Yeah.
He donated a collection that has since been named the Ernest Tune Coptic and Meroitic Library. At Claremont Graduate University, the library is now housed at Claremont School of Theology in Southern California. And I remember I was in the reading room of the Institute for Antiquity and Christianity at Claremont, and I was reading books on Coptic history, Egyptian history, and Nubian history. And Ernest Tune saw that, and he came to me and he said, "You know what? You should make this your area of doctoral concentration." And of course, he had donated a voluminous collection on Coptic, Meroitic, and Nubian studies at Claremont. A collection that scholars from UCLA said it was comparable, if not more so, than any collection here in Southern California, certainly at UCLA. So, in fact, I dedicated my dissertation in the name and honor of Dr. Ernest Tune, because of the influence that he had. And of course, I was at the time the first doctoral student, the first PhD student to take courses in the Ernest Tune collection. So I'm very proud of that.
Yes, God bless his soul, Ernie Tune, and we all benefited from his spirit, general spirit, his intellectual thought, soul, and mind. And also, it is said that like in 1970, around that time, or in the 60s, he was the only one in Southern California who owned Crumb's Coptic Dictionary.
Yes.
And he was always taking pride in doing so.
Yes.
And so he taught Coptic at Claremont,
Yes.
To the group who later translated the Nag Hammadi Library.
Yes, yes.
And I'm glad you interacted with him, and also I had the privilege of interacting with him. Who else in Claremont were your mentors, supervisors of your PhD work, or helpers?
My dissertation chair, Dr. Karen Torgerson, who is a patristic scholar herself, whose dissertation was actually on Origen, the great founder of Coptic theology and Eastern Orthodoxy in general. Karen Torgerson, as well as Teresa Shaw, who's another scholar at Claremont who had an impact upon me. Yeah. Of course, I mentioned I took Coptic with Richard Smith.
Yes.
There. Another scholar by the name of Howard Jackson had an influence on me, as well as, who am I thinking about? David Frankfurter, who's a scholar who wrote a book entitled Elijah in Upper Egypt, The Apocalypse of Elijah, which was a Coptic text. So, I mean, Claremont was just, at that time, it was heaven, if you will, for Coptic studies, and even still today, with the Gadat Gabra being at Claremont, the Coptic Encyclopedia is at Claremont.
Yes.
So, you know, I can go on and on about this legacy from the founding of the Institute of Antiquity and Christianity in 1967, all the way to until today, where Gadat Gabra and the Coptic Encyclopedia, Claremont has a proven legacy in Coptic studies. And what the Ernest Toon collection did is that it added another element, which was the Nubian element, which is what I also focused on as well. The Nubian studies and Nubian history and the interrelationship between the two cultures, the two civilizations.
It's great that Gadat Gabra has been in Claremont since the year 2007. That's perhaps at the time you completed your PhD.
It's exactly the time I completed my PhD.
So he expanded the Claremont activities in academic study of Coptology into Coptic art and Coptic monastic art, and Coptic text, New Testament, Old Testament liturgy, and like, for example, one of his latest courses has been the Coptic monasteries under Islamic rule, another course on Egyptian religions over 5,000 years, including ancient Egypt, Coptic Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So now that you graduated from Claremont in the year 2007, you went on to California State University, Dominguez Hills, and you are teaching, you actually is the past chair of Africana Studies there. And the courses you teach, you cannot teach Coptic the entire course, perhaps each and every semester, but what courses you teach in general that would include something Coptic or something Nubian Christianity?
Sure.
Like even one lecture per semester in a broader course.
I teach, again, Africana Studies, and we have one course in particular. It's called African World Civilizations. In this course, we just look at the history of African civilizations in general and their influence upon world civilizations, world culture, and world history. So in that course, I actually do spend some time dealing with the history of Egypt, and certainly I deal with Coptic Egypt and Coptic civilization. I think one of the things I like, it's really trivia if anything else. I ask people, do they know the indigenous name for Egypt before the Greeks called it Aegyptos, of course. And of course, the average freshman doesn't know this, and then I tell them that it was Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, or depending on your spelling. And then I say, do you know that in the Coptic Orthodox Church today, in the language of Coptic, Egypt continues to be called Keme, and then I spell it out in Coptic letters on the board, and all the students are fascinated by that, because most of them probably have never even seen the Coptic language written on the board for them and so forth. So yes, I do discuss Coptic civilization in my classes.
So would one of your students volunteer to say, may I write a term paper on a Coptic topic, and you guide them on which topic, or they choose themselves, or they have broad information enough to be selective?
Actually, in the time I've been at Dominguez Hills, Cal State Dominguez Hills, which is going on, it's been 8 years, going on 9 years. I've actually only had, which is fine, I've had one student who wrote a term paper exclusively on Coptic church and Coptic civilization. And I had the opportunity to mentor her and introduce her to many of the texts and things and so forth. For other students, it's usually general. It's mentioned in the context of, let's say, Nile Valley Christianity, Ethiopian church, the Nubian church, and so forth. So students come to understand the tradition, as I mentioned earlier, in the context of other early African Christian civilizations. So, would
existence of now the Claremont Coptic Encyclopedia get more of your students to select a Coptic topic while they are writing a term paper?
Oh, yeah.
Would that make a difference?
Oh, definitely. The Claremont Coptic Encyclopedia is a resource for my students at Cal State Dominguez Hills. It's an excellent resource. In fact, it's a resource that I've used in recent papers that I've written. So, yes, that can be made available to them. It's internet-based, so they have direct access to that for research.
In addition to the general student body, some of those students are Copts themselves.
Yes.
Because your state university is near Torrance Church, near Santa Mark Church in Los Angeles. It's in the center of many Coptic churches.
Yes.
St. George Church in Bellflower.
Yes.
And I'm sure there is a few dozen Coptic students in your university. And I hope they become aware of this treasure and of your courses, that they can, even if they are studying English literature or majoring in general history or art or whatever, they can still go to your classes, take a course, even general course, but write their term paper on something Coptic, given your capable supervision in the field.
Definitely. I mean, I welcome that. And I've actually received inquiries from students abroad because of what we're doing at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I've received inquiries from a student in Egypt, as well as Sudan, who were interested in the Coptic studies that we're doing at Cal State Dominguez Hills. So definitely, I think I may be, and again, I could be wrong, but in terms of my discipline, which is Africana studies, I may be the only Coptic specialist in the country who's also an Africana studies professor.
Yes.
So, you know, we provide a unique resource here in Southern California at Cal State Dominguez Hills.
That's great. That's great. We want many of Professor Salim Faraji, we want many of you, duplicates.
Yes, yes.
Human cloning.
Yeah, I have to replicate.
Yes.
Replicate myself.
Yes.
Introduce students to the same experience that I had in undergraduate school.
Yeah. I'm praying that may God bless your efforts and bring more students to appreciate Coptic topics and contribute to it themselves through study. Now you are also a minister at the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
How your academic studies in Nubian and Coptic help you or come into your ministry?
Well, I mean, I actually taught pastors, not just AME pastors, but other Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptists, and so forth, for 8 years at the University of Laverne. So being in the AME church, I often introduced the congregation as well as other pastors to a broader understanding of Christian history. And this is not to minimize the distinctiveness of the AME church or even what the Protestant tradition has to contribute. But I think, you know, we go a long way in understanding the Coptic church and understanding Coptic civilization and Coptic history. So I often, you know, I communicate to people, do you know that the first popes, the first theologians, the first institutions of higher learning focusing on Christianity all emerged in Egypt. This is important to know, monasticism and so forth. So I serve as an ambassador as much as I'm able to, given my limitations, of course. But I do my best to serve as an ambassador in the AME Church and among other Protestant denominations for people to take a look at the Coptic Church and see how vital it was to Christian civilization in general. It was fundamental, and people should know that.
I cannot thank you enough, Professor Salim Faraji, for your generous first accepting our invitation to come here today, and also your the conclusion, the concluding statement that you just made. I'm truly grateful, and you made me feel very good about being a Copt, but also not just very good in terms of pride, not at all. I meant as that there is a reward for the investment that any of us make in promoting Coptic studies.
Yes.
And you are an evidence of that. You provided us an evidence of that. And I'm really grateful for you working hard to produce this volume, The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, The Triumph of the Last Pharaoh. What a wonderful book. I benefited from it a lot, especially as a Copt. It helped my understanding of the interaction between Coptic Christianity and Nubian Christianity, and how the Nubian church was part of the Coptic church until 15th, 16th century. Yes. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. And our blessed viewers, thank you for watching Logos TV, our program Coptic Civilization. See you next week. I'm Michael Saad.